This is the story of America's first years and how a fragile republic refused to fall.
In 1783, the United States achieved what the world thought was impossible. 13 small colonies had stood up to the most powerful empire on earth, and won. But defeating Britain was only half the battle. The harder challenge was just beginning. The new nation was drowning in debt, torn by political rivalries, and held together by little more than hope. Powerful European nations watched and waited, certain this bold experiment in self-government would collapse. They were wrong. Within a single decade, Americans would write a constitution, build a government from nothing, and lay the foundation for what would become the most powerful nation in modern history. The revolution was over, but the crisis was not. The new nation was governed under a document called the Articles of Confederation, and it was failing. Congress had no power to collect taxes, no power to regulate trade, no real authority to enforce anything. Each of the 13 states acted almost like its own separate country, competing, arguing, and ignoring the central government whenever it suited them. The federal government was buried under Revolutionary War debt with no way to pay it back. Trade collapsed. The economy stagnated. Inflation destroyed savings overnight. In some states, desperate farmers took up arms against their own governments.
Give us back our farms! Disperse in the name of the law! We will not yield! We're not
unable to pay debts, losing their land, and finding no relief from a Congress that could do almost nothing. The situation was critical. America's leaders faced an uncomfortable truth. If something didn't change, there might not be a United States at all. In May 1787, delegates from 12 states gathered in Philadelphia for what would become one of the most important meetings in human history. These were not ordinary men: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, among the most brilliant political minds of their generation, and they knew it. They arrived with a modest official purpose: to improve the Articles of Confederation. They left having done something far more ambitious. Over nearly 4 sweltering months behind closed doors, they scrapped the old system entirely and built something new. The debate was fierce. How much power should the federal government hold? How should leaders be elected? How do you protect liberty while still maintaining order? How do you keep any one man or group from seizing total control? The answers became the Constitution of the United States. Power was divided into 3 branches. The legislature would make the laws. The executive would enforce them. The judiciary would interpret them. Each branch was designed to check the others, so that no single person, party, or institution could ever dominate completely. In September 1787, the delegates signed it. America finally had a blueprint, not just for a government, but for a new kind of country. A constitution on paper meant nothing without someone trusted enough to bring it to life. There was only one man the country unanimously agreed upon: George Washington. In 1789, he became the first president of the United States, elected without a single opposing vote. On April 30th, he stood in New York City, then the nation's capital, and took the oath of office. The crowd that gathered knew they were witnessing history. But Washington himself felt the weight more than anyone. He wrote privately that he felt like a man walking toward his own execution. Because everything was new. There were no traditions, no precedents, no guidebook. Every single decision Washington made would set an example that presidents for centuries would follow. He formed the first cabinet. He defined the limits of executive power. He worked tirelessly to appear as a servant of the people rather than a ruler above them. In a world full of kings, Washington chose to be something different. And in doing so, he gave the republic its best possible start.
Liberty is finally ours! It does not go far enough.
Even with the Constitution ratified, many Americans were not satisfied. They had just fought a war to escape the tyranny of a powerful government. What was to stop this new government from becoming the very thing they had rebelled against? They demanded guarantees. James Madison listened. In 1791, 10 amendments to the Constitution were ratified. They became known as the Bill of Rights. And they changed everything. freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to a fair trial.
I stand on my rights as a free man. This court will uphold the law of the land.
Protection against unlawful searches, the right to bear arms. These were not gifts from the government. They were limits on it. The message was clear. There are things the state can never take from its citizens. The Constitution gave America its structure. The Bill of Rights gave it its soul. Together, they became the twin pillars of American democracy, still standing more than 2 centuries later. George Washington had one great fear for his country. He believed that political factions, parties, would eventually tear the republic apart. History would prove him both right and wrong. Almost immediately, his own cabinet became a battleground. Alexander Hamilton, brilliant, ambitious, and bold, believed America's future lay in a powerful central government, a national bank, and a strong industrial economy. Thomas Jefferson, idealistic, principled, and deeply suspicious of concentrated power, believed states should govern themselves, that farmers were the backbone of the republic, and that Hamilton's vision was a path to tyranny. 2 men, 2 visions, 1 nation. Their rivalry split the country. Hamilton's supporters became Federalists. Jefferson's became Democratic Republicans. America's first political parties were born, not by design but by disagreement. The battle was fierce. Newspapers became weapons. Public figures were attacked without mercy. But here is what made it remarkable. Despite all the fury, no one picked up a gun. No one seized power by force. The fighting happened through words, votes, and debate. The young republic was discovering something profound, that a free society could survive bitter disagreement as long as everyone still played by the rules. While America sorted out its internal politics, the world outside its borders was exploding. France, America's greatest ally during the Revolution, had descended into its own bloody revolution. Soon, Britain and France were at war again, dragging much of Europe into the conflict. Americans were divided. Some felt loyalty to France. Others feared revolution and preferred Britain. Washington made a decision that would prove crucial. America would stay out of it. In 1793, he issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, keeping the young nation out of a war it had no business fighting and no resources to survive. Critics accused him of betrayal. Supporters called it wisdom. History sided with Washington. Meanwhile, on the western frontier, conflicts with Native American tribes intensified as American settlers pushed further into lands that were not theirs. It was a painful and complex reality. The expansion of one people came at a devastating cost to others. Economic hardships continued. Political tensions boiled. The pressures were relentless. But the government held. In 1796, George Washington did something that shocked the world. He walked away. He could have been president for life. Most people wanted him to be. But Washington understood something deeply important. The moment any republic begins to depend on one man, it stops being a republic. He stepped down voluntarily, establishing a tradition of peaceful transfer of power that would define American democracy. John Adams became the second president. Then came the election of 1800, one of the most bitterly contested in American history. Thomas Jefferson defeated Adams in a brutal, divisive campaign. And then something happened that had almost never happened before in the history of the world. The losing side handed over power. No revolution, no military coup, no bloodshed, just ballots. Jefferson called it the Revolution of 1800, not because anyone had fought, but because no one had to. The peaceful transfer of power between rival parties was, in many ways, America's greatest achievement of this entire era. In just 11 years, a fragile collection of former colonies had done something remarkable. They had written a constitution that balanced power and protected freedom, built a government from scratch, with no blueprint to follow, enshrined individual rights that governments could not take away, survived bitter political divisions without descending into violence. and proven that democracy, messy, loud, imperfect democracy, could actually work. The United States in 1800 was still small, still uncertain, still surrounded by more powerful nations waiting for it to fail. But the foundations were solid. The experiment had survived its first great test, and the world would never be the same. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to World We Know and join us as we explore the events that shaped our world.